Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Biz, and I'm really excited to welcome back to the Innova.Buzz podcast today, all the way from Pacifica in California, the USA, of course, Kevin Kelly. Kevin helped launch and edit Wired magazine. He's written for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and his latest book is Excellent Advice for Living. And we'll talk about the subtitle in a moment. Now, Kevin was also our guest on episode 83 of the Innova.Buzz podcast. Welcome back to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Kevin. It's a privilege
Oh,
to talk to you again.
yes, and my honor. Thank you for having me here again, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Now, last time we chatted a lot about lifelong learning and inventing jobs to automate, the shift from ownership to access was a big topic. We talked about human attention as a real valuable commodity, future ownership of data, and a lot more. So we can probably go down those tracks again because I know some of the pieces of advice in your book relate to some of those topics. So I'm really looking forward to another wide-ranging and insightful conversation. But before we get on to some of those things, what's the impact you're making in the world today, Kevin?
Oh my gosh, I hope that I'm encouraging to people to be as optimistic as they possibly can. I think optimism can often be sort of disposition that people maybe inherit, and I have a sunny, optimistic disposition, but it's also something that you can learn. You can teach children to be more optimistic. There's something called learned optimism. And I myself have been teaching myself to be even more optimistic than I am naturally. So I've become more optimistic as I've gotten older. And I think optimism is hugely in need of the world right now in order to accomplish all the good things that we want the future to be. It requires us to be more optimistic than we have been collectively. And my mission is to increase the optimism of the world.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a real worthy mission. One of the things that I always wonder about is why is it that negative things that happen are so much more newsworthy for the
Yeah,
mainstream media than good news stories or
sure,
things that actually generate optimism within
sure.
us.
One thing is that bad things happen fast, and so you can report on them. Whereas good things take time and it requires a lot more patience to have them complete. And so there's less news. There's just going to be a lot more bad news because bad things happen so quickly. And there is also more ways to fail than to succeed. So in general, there is generally more bad news. And so it's no surprise really that our media is going to be filled, and even the best media. This is not anything political. This is just any media is going to be more occupied with bad stuff than good stuff. If you had to only have headlines written every 10 years, there might be some more
Maybe, yeah.
better news in it, more optimistic news. So that's just the nature of the beast. And I don't think there's really a way to change that other than we have to pay attention to longer term things, to things
Hmm.
that take longer. And I also find myself that the more I look to the past, the more optimistic I become because we get to see that compounded in
Hmm.
um, accumulation over time. So 1% difference is hardly recognizable in the world today. You can already see it, but 1% compounded or even over 10 years is noticeable. And so you can often see the good news only in retrospect in a certain weird way. And that's, and that's what we talk about at the long now. The long now is like increasing the how much you pay attention, not only just to the future, but also to the past. And
Yeah.
if you read history at all, one of your things you realize is that the craziness that we have in politics right now is really nothing compared to how crazy it was in the past. I mean, believe me, there was just some very, very extreme things happening. Um, And so I think it enables us to not be as anxious.
Hmm. Yes, yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I recently saw Hamilton for the first time, and
Yes,
then dug into because, of course, as a non-American, American history and the politics, we kind of got the broad sense of it, but not all the details. So I
right.
read up on the background of Alexander Hamilton and so on, and the whole story about the duel and the guy that was
Yes. I
actually
mean,
vice
could you imagine
president.
a vice president today coming out and shooting his political opponent
Yeah.
with a gun? And it's oh, everybody's okay, that's fine. So yeah, no, it's the the past is knowing about the past and understanding what daily life was really like and the hardships that they
Hmm.
had and the craziness, I think helps us take a more optimistic view of our possible future.
Hmm. One of the things, and I don't recall now if you have quote, you've probably got quotes related to this, but specifically the idea of gratitude, and do you
Yeah,
think that as humans we aren't focused enough on gratitude? I mean, there's so much every day that is part of our routine that we take for granted that we could just stop and take a moment to be grateful for, and that probably gives us cause for more optimism.
absolutely. One of the little bits of advice in the book, and the book is excellent advice for living, is that taking a moment to write down what you're grateful for each day is the best mental therapy that you could possibly pay for. And that stance of gratitude is something that motivates me. It's a type of trust. It's a type of assuming the best of other people. It works out of a kind of a generosity that I believe the universe actually has, and that we can receive in some ways. I have another bit of advice in the book about pronoia, a term I did not invent, but I've used, which is the opposite of paranoia. So paranoia is this belief that you have, an assumption that everybody's conspiring behind your back to take you down, and
Hmm.
pronoia is the opposite, which is everybody's conspiring behind your back to make you succeed. And
Yeah.
I believe, in fact, that that's what it is that most people actually want you to succeed if you will let them, and if you let them, and if you accept their help, and if you are open to the best of them. And sometimes, sure, if you trust strangers, you might get cheated, but that's a small tax to pay for the abundant overpayment that you're going to get from people giving you their best because you trusted them. And so yeah, so I think gratitude is, in some ways, at the basis of my advice, which is that it's a reliable stance. I mean, there's a weird paradox at the foundation of the universe, and that paradox says that the more you give, the more you get.
Hmm.
Mathematically, that doesn't work, right? There's the logic there is missing, but that is something that's very, very reliable. The more you give, the more you'll get, and that is the foundation of wisdom. That's kind of the stance, the perspective, the framework for a lot of my advice is this idea that this stance of generosity and gratitude and acceptance and giving is how you the most selfish thing you can do.
Hmm.
The most selfish thing you can
Yeah.
do is to give stuff away. Again, it's a paradox.
Yeah, yeah, it is a paradox, and I've I mean, we're similar ages, and I'm reflecting a lot on some of the things I've done in the past, and looking back on the impact that's had on other people in
Hmm.
a way that I feel gratitude for having had an impact on somebody else, and it comes back
Right.
to your point that you mentioned that um, pronoia that fundamentally we're all actually excited to help others and
Yeah.
have that impact. And but I'm like I get fulfillment and satisfaction out of having had that impact, which is the selfish part of it. So
Hmm.
there's actually a gift in that for me,
Hmm.
as well as whatever the gift was for the
Hmm.
other person that took
Hmm.
some action as a result of what I did or said.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's you know, there's a temptation to think that this is a kind of a privileged position to be speaking from, as a person that has had many opportunities through life. But my observation is not just based on my own life. My observation is based on having spent an enormous amount of my own life living among some of the poorest people in the world and some of the
Mm,
poorest people who are still poor today in other countries around the world, and seeing that the same thing is true no matter what your station, and how you begin, that even if you are desperately poor, it's still the same thing, that those who adopt pronoia, that those who are generous even with little, will still in the end do better than those who don't. And so it doesn't, so you can still be generous no matter where you begin.
mm. Yeah, excellent point. One of the things you mentioned is the idea of compounding and looking back on
Hmm.
a longer term
Yeah.
and reflecting on how far you've come, for example. And one of the quotes in the book that I've noted down here that I really like is a worthy goal for a year is to learn enough about a subject so that you
Yeah.
can't believe how ignorant you were about that subject a
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
earlier. And I thought that really resonated for me because I sometimes delve into some new things and I get really frustrated and I get angry that it's not that I'm not kind of making more progress on
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
this or mastering it. And then at some point, I look back and I think, oh, this is all so easy now, simply because I've invested that time and just continued to learn,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
compounding effect kicks in.
Yeah. I've recently, the past year, 2 years, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about the elements, the atomic elements, the basic building blocks of chemistry, the nature of the actual things that make up our entire world. And I was just astounded how ignorant I was, because there were all these elements I'd never even heard of. Hafnium, Scandinavium. I
Yeah.
mean, these are pretty basic elements, and I never, I think I'd never heard of them. So just investigating that, understanding how they came about, how people, what we know about them, what they're useful for, how they were discovered, where their names came from. I mean, there's just so much. I realized that these are kind of like, the, the, again, these are the basic elements of my world and everything built around me, whatever this pen is made out of.
Hmm.
And I didn't even know some of the um, characters that were involved in that movie. And so yeah, I'm astounded how ignorant I was to begin with. It's like, how, I mean, because I was like, I studied chemistry in school and stuff. I was like, how could I have gotten so far and not have ever known all this?
Yeah. 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 Well, I recently delved into the area of cell biochemistry. Now, I did
Right,
biochemistry at school as well, but we didn't go into the cell area,
right.
and understanding the interactions inside the human body that
Right.
trigger various things to happen around metabolism, around sleep, around diet, around fat storage, and the relationship. And again, going back to history, because the way the human body has evolved in terms of cell structure and cell
Hmm.
metabolism uh, actually hasn't kept pace with the changes in modern diet over the
Yeah,
years. And so
true, true, true.
understanding all of that, and again, it's like you said, there's, oh wow, I didn't know all that. And at some point, things are starting to fall into place again. So it's again this thing of looking back 3 months or so and saying, "Oh, I can't believe I didn't know any of that."
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the world is very large, and there is so much to know. So you can't know everything, but you
Hmm.
can still you can always improve everything in every direction. Um, we're not all equally outfitted with talents. We have a different mix, but we can all get a better in whatever direction we want to go. And part of my book is about this advice about trying to have people rise and grow in the direction of whatever that mix of talents they have, and trying to understand what it is that each person is unique and has in a unique combination. Just like we have unique faces, we all look a little different sufficiently that an AI can actually tell us apart. And so we want our lives to be the same way. Um, we want our lives to be improbable. That's
Hmm.
another way of thinking about it. If you like a kind of systems point of view, entropy is all about making the probable. So everybody probabilistically is headed towards heat death, and there's these little pockets of improbability, which is what life is all about. And we want to become more improbable than we were.
Yeah, I
And
love.
the most remarkable people are very improbable, and
Yeah,
that's what a life is. It's a life is uh, aiming for the improbable and making yourself the most improbable character that you possibly can, which is not easy to do.
hmm.
It's a lifelong journey. And by the way, on the route to becoming the only you requires everybody else to help you. That's kind of another paradox.
Hmm.
Is that the only way to become an individual is with a lot of friends' help.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that fascinates me as well is this whole area of quantum physics, and if you kind of delve into that at a metaphysical level, we're all connected in some ways.
Yeah.
So whatever you do impacts me in
Yes.
some way.
In some
Uh,
way.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so that comes back to that
Right.
paradox
Right.
of
Right.
we need everybody's help. Hmm.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 We and that's the infinite game. There's finite games which are played to win or lose, and everybody must obey the rules, and it's completely unfair, and people are outraged if you don't follow the rules. And there are winners and losers, and then there's infinite games. And the purpose of an infinite game is not to win or lose; it's to keep the game going and get as many people to play.
Hmm.
And so you're kind of, and that's what we're involved in life is an infinite game because we're all connected and we want everybody to win. So what we want the game to continue as long as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the other things, 'cause, you talked about becoming improbable. One of the other quotes that's reminded me of, and I think it may be later in the book, the chief prevention against getting old is to remain astonished.
Yes, right. Yeah. So getting old in that case is, I mean, obviously we age, but I think old there means that we stop learning, stop changing, stop growing.
Hmm.
And I would say, maybe rephrasing it more correctly, to keep growing, we remain astonished. And so, um, you know, life is a very non equilibrial process. There's a kind of a misconception in ecology. They talk about harmony and nature being harmonious, but nature is anything but harmonious. It's actually the opposite. It's constantly in flux. Even a majestic ecosystem that looks eternal is actually in the process of changing. It has been changing and is changing every year. And if you had a time lapse camera over the centuries, you'd see that there's a march of different species coming through, and it's very much in a dynamic flux. And that's what life is. It's actually a flux. It's actually movement. And if things become harmonious and in equilibrium, it dies.
Mm.
So in our own lives, we want flux, we want movement, we want growth to the end, because that's what life is. And so we're more alive as we grow, and we're less alive when we're in equal harmony and stasis and stuff. So we have to be kind of a little careful about that kind of harmony. We want the kind of right kind of harmony, so to speak,
Yeah.
which is this the harmony of equilibrium in process of disequilibrium. And kind of like it's like the harmony of a surfer is what they often talk about, surfing along the waves. And there's a certain harmony where you're in balance, but you actually are almost falling over the entire
Mm.
time.
Yes. Yeah. Just working pretty hard to keep that balance, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's a balance, and that's what life is. It's a balance between
Mm.
rigid order and total chaos, and there's some little sweet spot that's right in between where it's almost always falling over. And by the way, when you're walking, that's what walking is. Walking is constantly almost falling.
Yeah.
You're catching yourself, and that's how you kind of go forward. And you want that kind of rhythm in life, where you're almost falling the entire time.
Mm. Yeah. I like the metaphor and the surfing one too. Yeah. Sort of at the top of the wave just before
Right,
you.
right, right. Just about. You're
Yeah.
always the whole way down.
Yeah. Mm. Excellent. One of the other points or quotes in the book that kind of that brings me on to is where you said a great way to understand yourself is to
Mm.
seriously reflect on things that you find irritating in others,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
a real fascinating one because I often find myself if I catch myself being annoyed by what somebody else has done or what I observe in somebody else, I often kind of pull myself back and I say, why does that annoy me? And what
Right.
is it about me?
Right, exactly. And that's really the genesis of it. It's not saying that you are that, but just that if you are really perturbed by that, there's something in it that's touching you in a
Mm,
way that could be that you are like that, or could be that you have something about it that particularly um, that's particularly primitive to you. And so it's an opportunity to kind of explore yourself. And that's the general job, general task that we have, we humans, is that we are incredibly ignorant of our own motivations, our own minds, what we actually think, what we think we think. We don't really have good access. Language is one of the few handles we have on how we think, but it's not good enough, and we doesn't go far enough to actually understand ourselves. And so that's why we require all these other tools around us, including family and friends and customers and clients and strangers and other tools like therapy and meditation. All these things are kind of needed. The quantified self, measuring self, they're all needed to help us see ourselves, because the way we're built, we're just very hard for our own egos or whatever are centered
mm,
to see who we are, to understand how we work, and then to understand what we're good at and what we can do and how we matter. And so that's why we're social beings. I mean, that's why we are born into these elaborate networks of people, is not as punishment, but as a way in which we can arrive at our kind of self-awareness and self-knowledge so that we can be our best.
mm. Wonderful. Well, you touched on language there. You did mention AI earlier, so I wanted to touch on this. There's been a massive amount of
Yeah,
buzz for the last, I guess, 6 months now
yeah.
around Chat GPT in particular, but the whole idea of these language learning models. So, what's your take on those, and how do they factor into your picture of optimism for the world?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm hugely optimistic, very, very excited by what's happening. Um, there's so many ways to talk about it. Here's one framing of it, which is that a lot of what these AIs, recent AIs, the generative AIs, the chats that can work with text, and the image generators that work with text. A lot of what they're doing is not actually new. It's actually been capable of, say, in the last 5 years. What's new, what the big bang is that now they suddenly have a conversational interface to them,
Yeah.
which is huge, huge, huge. So it reminds me a lot of the early or the 80s and 90s when the web was coming along, because the internet had been around for a decade and a half. I was on it, but it was very hard to use. It required programming and command line code and all kinds of stuff, and it was hard to see and hard to access for people. And the Big Bang was the invention of Mosaic and the web. And suddenly now it was the same same technology basically, but now it's suddenly visible. Now it's suddenly accessible to everybody, and that was this mad rush as people kind of just they finally got it. It was no longer just teenage boys, and so this is the same thing. So this stuff is this power. They've been doing these kinds of things for a while, but they was really hard to do, required coding, some engineering. But now suddenly we all can have a conversation, and now this conversational interface is attached to the AIs, and now we have these UPIs, I call them, Universal Personal Interns. Everybody has an intern that you can converse with. You can have a dialogue that you can tell in normal English language over and back and forth. You can collaborate with. So these are collaboration agents. And these collaborative aliens are working with us, and they're as fast as we can speak. They're being plugged into everything. Every app, every company is just bringing them on, just like everybody went onto the web very, very quickly. And they're kind of being embedded into us. And what they give us is this universal personal intern. They give us the work of interns. So Google GPS gave us the personal navigator, the search engines gave us personal librarians, and now we're going to have the personal interns that will do all kinds of work for us. And some of the most mediocre people will be helped the most. And then the really professionals will also use it to do a lot of the kind of work that they can do, but don't want to have to do, and certainly can't do a lot of it very quickly. So, so it's really magical. And one of the things about it is that the inventors of these technologies have no idea what they were going to be used for or what they were good for. They didn't know. So they're surprised by what's happening as anybody else, and that also means that they don't know what they're bad for. And my refrain is that we can't figure out the plus and minuses of technologies by thinking about them. There's only a limited amount of what we can do. We can only judge them by the evidence of actual use. We have to use them over time. And ChatGPT 4 has been 12 days, I don't know, something crazy number of days, a few days, where already people are wanting to regulate it. After 12 days, it's like, no. We have to use it for years, really. We need not just one study, we need hundreds of studies, just like health. You don't make a policy on something around health based on one study, two studies, 10. You need hundreds of studies because there's so many variables to unpack and disentangle. So this is new. I'm very excited by it. The people who make it have no idea what it's going to be used for. We get to decide or figure out what it's going to be used for. We get to steer it by using it. It's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. And it's fascinating that the inventors, I mean, I've seen so many different applications that I've talked to people and about the things that I've done, and they say, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I'll have to try that out." And then other people have told me about the stuff they're doing, and which has excited me. And I didn't think about trying that out. So, yeah, you're right. There's so many potential applications there, and again, I mean, if you think back to social media, everybody was excited by social media in the beginning, and now there's conversations around, well, it's, there's bad things about social media because there's extremists
Mm-hmm.
go on there and they have conversations and get together to do evil. Um, but yeah, is that social media or is that just misuse? Because there's all kinds of tools around that can be
Yeah, you could do it on a
misused for
telephone.
evil.
You
Hmm.
could coordinate evil on a telephone,
Hmm.
but we do we want to stop telephones? No, we don't. So yeah, so there's definitely going to be downsides to this. I think the more powerful the technology, the more powerful the problems. And undoubtedly, in my view, AI is the most powerful technology we've ever invented, and we're just beginning. Of course, this is just like in 30 years from now, they'll look back and they'll say you didn't have AI in any form
Yeah.
in 2023. Um, but it is nonetheless we're entering into the most powerful technology, and it will be powerfully misused and powerfully abused. There's no doubt in my mind.
Hmm.
But I am enthusiastic and optimistic about it because our capacity for solving problems has actually been increased by this AI. So
Yeah.
we have new problems that'll be bigger than ever, but we have new power to solve problems that are bigger than ever, and that actually increases faster. Our will to survive always exceeds our will to destroy. So, um, as long as we can create 1% more than we destroy every year, we got
We're
civilization.
on the path forward. Yeah. It's a compounding effect.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is fascinating. Kevin, I could go on talking ages about it, go and pull some more quotes out of the book, but we do want to leave some for the listener to go and read themselves.
Sure.
And
I mean, I have some advice for like 20-year-olds. This book was kind of written a little bit for my adult young children, and you know, one of the things I would say to them, which I told my own children, the same thing, which is like when you're in your 20s, uh, spend a hunk of time if you possibly can working on something where um, they don't have a name for what it is that you do, that you're out ahead of language. There's no name. It takes some time to explain to your mother what it is that you're doing, and uh, there you're more likely to be at the place where there's going to be a breakthrough. You're more likely to have no competition. You're more likely to find this thing that only you can do, and if at all possible, at the same time, um, work on something that is sort of crazy, stupid, um, out of the ordinary, memorable, dangerous, um, uh, unproductive, and looks nothing like success. Because later on, that will become your touchstone. That experience will become your touchstone for all the great things that you'll do. Okay, and so you have to kind of allow yourself to get lost, and so to speak, and to waste some time doing that, goofing off,
hmm,
and again, it should look nothing like success at that time. And that, again, it'll help you be different. It'll help you think differently. Help you come to something in a different angle. And that is the great difficult thing we have when we're connected to each other 24 hours a day with these little stone devices, in our pockets. And so to overcome that, you want to do something that is sort of out of the ordinary and don't think about it in terms of success because success for most people is imitation. Your image most people's image of success is basically taken from others. And so if you're able to forget about that and do something, you'll be closer to having your own kind of success.
hmm.
So you want to be the star in your own movie and not an extra in someone else's movie.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Love the metaphor, and also enjoy the journey, right? Because
Exactly.
that's part of developing that experience is
Right.
enjoying the journey, taking time to enjoy the journey rather than focus so much on whatever destination it is that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, it's the journey. figuring out what you're good at that nobody else is, for me, has taken most of my life. There might be some special people who very early, some prodigies who understand very clearly when they're young what it is that they're better at than most people. But most people are like me, that we don't know, and it takes a meandering journey with hard left turns and detours and turnarounds to arrive at the beginning of understanding what that is. And that's why the path of most remarkable people is going to be very crooked. That very few of them ever started off anywhere near where they ended up, and that's because it's a long, torturous process of figuring out who you are and what you're good at and how to do it, and even and there's no destination. I mean, it's a journey. You're constantly going. Even as you get older, you're still waking up asking, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? That's what I ask myself, right? So.
Yes, so I often reflect on that question. I mean, you get it a lot when you're in your sort of early teens and mid-teens, and just before making key decisions like what school are you going to go to, what college are you going to go to, what are you going to study at university, and so on, these key milestones, or what job or what apprenticeship are you going to go. And people are asking that. And I sometimes reflect back on that and think, well, maybe I still haven't grown up. So.
You have, hopefully you haven't. You want to remain astonished. Yeah, I mean, I try to impart to the young people is that it doesn't really matter too much where you start. It doesn't really matter that much where you go to school. You'll have a set of friends wherever you go, and those are going to be more important than the classes you take. Don't worry about grades in college. Oh my gosh, don't even think about grades. Don't, it's like nobody will ever ask you what your grades were in college. Or they shouldn't. They shouldn't care. If they do care, I would be suspicious. But yeah. So where you start is not that important as long as you start somewhere and master something, and then you can kind of use that mastery to kind of move. But where you start, it's not going to be where you're going to reach your fullness.
Wonderful. Well, this has been fabulous, Kevin. Now, where can people find out more about you, the work you do, get a hold of the book?
So the book again is Excellent Advice for Living, Wisdom I Wish I'd Known Earlier, and most of it is stuff I wished I'd known. A lot of it kind of practical stuff about, if you're going to buy a ladder or cable, get it longer than you think you should, and that'll be the right size. Things like that. And some of it is a little bit more spiritual about don't try to be the best, try to be the only. This idea of on the day before you die, you want to be able to say that you fully become yourself, and that's the goal. So things I write about the AI and so forth are on my website at my initials kk.org. And recently I did a book that has 9,000 photographs from my 50 years of traveling in Asia, documenting the disappearing traditions of Asia. It's called Vanishing Asia. 50 years of photography. And that was a monumental work, just getting that out in 3 volumes. It weighed 30 pounds. This is a monster. This book is a little tiny. It's my smallest book yet.
Yeah.
And I do recommendo, which is once a week, half-page stuff that I and my 2 partners recommend. A little tiny paragraphs of stuff, good stuff, and we have cool tools, podcasts, all that kind of stuff. So kk.org. The book is out in May, so I think someone young in your life or someone young at heart would enjoy it. 450 little bits of tweetable advice that you could use to remind yourself.
Excellent. And of course, we'll post those links in the show notes. And And I'm guessing by the time we publish this, the book should be available in
Yeah,
all the
or it's
bookstores.
pre-order on Amazon. If not,
Hmm.
um, it'll be available. Um, and you know, my hope is that everybody alive would have the chance to find a way to express their unique genius. And I'm trying to encourage others to follow what they're good at, what they can get paid to do, what they enjoy doing, and what others find difficult and they find easy.
Hmm.
So that's likely to be something that you are better at than others. The thing, there's a piece of advice, that thing that made you weird as a kid can make you great as an adult as long as you don't lose it. So
Yeah,
with that, keep
that's
going forward.
brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Well, before we wrap up, is there one particular action out of our conversation today you'd like our listener to take as a result of the conversation?
We didn't mention it, but if you want to do something heroic, um, write a thank you note to one of your teachers.
Mm,
You'll
love
be
it.
a hero,
Yeah.
and that's what they live for. Their
Mm,
teachers have dedicated their lives and sacrificed a lot, and they just love hearing from former students about um, their influence on the world.
mm. Excellent. Well, there's a very concrete action, so encourage everybody to do that. And thanks so much, Kevin, for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously, and some of the bits of wisdom from your book. And as you say, it's there's all these things we learn as we go through life's journey, and you think back and think, oh, I wish I had have known that 20 years ago or 30 years
Yeah,
ago or
yeah,
more in our case. And yeah, it's
yeah. So I wrote them down, and I hope they're helpful to everybody else out there. Um, and let me know what you think. So again, thank you for having me.